My name is Ines, and I am 37 years old. I am a freelance photographer. In the summer of 2010, I traveled from Guatemala City to Lake Atitlan. My plan was to document the life and customs of the communities settled around it. My colleagues insisted that this place, marked by volcanoes and surrounded by an almost mystical beauty, would be the perfect setting for a photographic series that I could exhibit in Europe. I was eager to explore every corner and soak up the legends circulating about the lake. What I never imagined was that, on that trip, I would find more than just beautiful landscapes. I arrived in Panajachel on a Saturday morning. I still remember the first time I saw the lake from the highway, an intense blue blanket surrounded by green volcanoes that seemed to guard an ancient treasure. The atmosphere was fresh and slightly humid at the pier, where tourists and boatmen gathered, offering tours. Different languages mingled: English, French, German, and, returning like an echo, Spanish. However, what caught my attention the most was the presence of women in their traditional clothing, embroidered with vibrant colors, offering textiles and crafts. I stayed at a modest inn near the pier, run by a woman named Teresa, a middle-aged lady, attentive and always smiling. After unpacking my luggage and taking a shower, I went out to find food and explore. My plan was to take some pictures and talk to the locals to organize my trip around the lake. On one of those outings, I met Tomas. He was a local guide, dressed in cloth pants, a simple shirt, and a short hat. He offered to take me to different towns along the shore and share stories and legends he had known since childhood. I immediately had good chemistry with him. He was a kind person who genuinely enjoyed sharing the secrets of his land. Same afternoon, while talking with Tomas, I learned about a legend that many locals called the Guardian of the Lake. According to him, it was a spirit or ancient entity that lived in the depths. People described it in different ways. Some saw it as a tall, pale man, while others believed it had the features of an aquatic creature. Its supposed purpose was to watch over the waters, ensuring they remained pure and that the inhabitants honored the lake with respect. On nights of the full moon, Tomas said, they say a strange light can be seen moving over the water. Some claim the guardian comes to the shore, and its whispers lure those who wander alone. I asked him if he believed in the story, and he looked at me with a mixture of skepticism and fear. I don't know if the Guardian is real, but the lake is full of mysteries. My sister disappeared here a few years ago. We never found her, and for my family, it meant the lake swallowed her. Since then, I can't look at these waters the same way. His words shook me. At that moment, all I saw was a picturesque place full of life, but in his eyes, I could see deep pain. I asked if he could take me to San Pedro and Santiago Atitlan. I wanted to start my journey as soon as possible, and I was curious to hear more stories like these. The next day, early in the morning, we took a boat from Panajachel to Santiago Atitlan, one of the largest towns on the shore. The journey was smooth, the water was calm, and the reflection of the volcanoes on the blue surface gave the impression of a double horizon. I took out my camera and started shooting nonstop, trying to capture every moment. Tomas pointed out the San Pedro volcano and told me stories about eruptions and ancient rituals. When we arrived, we walked through the main streets, where a lively atmosphere filled the town. Street vendors sold their goods, tuk-tuks offered rides, women sold fresh fruit, and children ran around playing. I took my time photographing the traditional clothing and the daily lives of local families. Later, we sat down for lunch near the central plaza, where Tomas taught me a few words in the local dialect. It had been a productive day. By the evening, my memory card was full of images of the town and its inhabitants. Yet, in the back of my mind, the story of the Guardian kept lingering, especially when I approached the shore and saw the water, now tinged with gold by the setting sun. We returned to Panajachel at dusk. I was exhausted, but something inside me refused to stay shut in at the inn. I decided to take a walk along the pier before going to sleep. The night was dark, with only a few dim lights from distant boats. The volcanoes loomed as imposing silhouettes against the sky. Shortly before 10, I suddenly felt as if someone whispered my name. Ines. Ines. I spun around, convinced that no one was there. A shiver ran down my spine. I could hear music from a bar in the distance, but no other nearby sounds. Was my exhaustion playing tricks on me? Feeling uneasy, I returned to the inn, my legs slightly trembling. That night, I slept restlessly. I dreamed of deep waters and a voice calling me from the bottom of the lake, a voice neither male nor female, but overlapping echoes forming a haunting sound. I woke up at dawn with a lingering sense of unease that I couldn't shake off. The next day, Tomas and I set off for San Juan La Laguna and then San Pedro La Laguna, 2 more towns along the shore. In San Juan, I met a local painter who sold vibrant paintings depicting scenes of Mayan life. As part of my interviews, I asked him about the famous Guardian. I asked Manuel if he believed in the legend. The painter, who called himself Manuel, took a moment before answering. My grandmother used to say that the lake was alive and sometimes it claimed what was hers. She wasn't talking about a man or a monster, but about the lake's energy itself. If you offend it or don't show it respect, the lake will take its toll. Every time someone disappeared in the water, my grandmother was convinced the lake had trapped them. I noticed that when Manuel spoke those words, he wasn't joking. He said them with grave conviction, as if they were part of his family history. I left him sitting in front of his canvases and began to walk, feeling a nervous tickle in the pit of my stomach. Later, in San Pedro La Laguna, I spoke with a community guide. He told me that, in recent years, there had been several drownings. Many locals attributed these deaths to underground currents that could drag people under with force. But there were also those who insisted that, at dusk, the lake whispered names, imitating voices to lure people into the water. That story gave me goosebumps, especially since just the night before I had felt as if someone had whispered my name. One of my personal goals, beyond work, was to capture photos that conveyed the mystery of the lake. It might sound romantic, but I had dreamed of capturing something beyond the purely touristy, a silent sunrise with mist or the moon's reflection on the surface. I decided to wake up at dawn to find that perfect shot. However, Tomas, always practical, warned me, "Ines, please don't go out alone to the shore so late. There are drunkards, and there's no shortage of criminals. And besides, those whispers, those rumors, I don't know. It's better to always be accompanied." That was how he called me, adapting my name to his way of speaking. I smiled and reassured him that I would be careful. But deep down, a part of me was drawn to the idea of hearing that whisper again. It had made my blood run cold, and I wanted to capture it with my recorder. I needed to uncover the supernatural, if anything was truly hiding in those waters. Or maybe it was all just my imagination. 2 days later, I decided to stay in San Pedro La Laguna. I had been taking pictures of people selling food on the street and of Los Viajeros, a group of musicians playing in the bars. Around 10 p.m., I wandered away from the well-lit area toward a secondary dock, where there was almost no one. The night was clear, drawing a silver path across the lake. I turned on my recorder and held it with some nervousness, hoping to capture any strange sounds. The water was still as a mirror. My footsteps echoed on the wooden dock. When I reached the end, I sat down, letting my feet dangle near the surface. Minutes passed in silence. I was beginning to think I was just making a fool of myself, chasing ghost stories before bedtime. That's when I felt it. A shiver ran down my neck. The air shifted slightly. A whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were words. I leaned forward, holding my breath. The sound intensified, resonating inside my head like a hypnotic call. I didn't understand what it was saying, but I knew it was calling. I stood up instinctively, my heart pounding. For a brief moment, I thought about reaching my hand toward the water, but a primal fear stopped me. I stared into the darkness, seeing only the vast lake stretching before me, and then with total clarity, I heard it. A voice. My name. It floated in the air, soft but persistent, like distant thunder. Reality snapped back when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. It was Tomas, running toward me with a flashlight, breathless. "Ines, are you okay? I was looking for you." His voice broke the trance. I took several steps back and stumbled, nearly falling onto the dock. My recorder was still on, trembling in my hand. Without another word, Tomas helped me up, and we hurried away from the shore. "I told you not to do this again," he muttered. "The lake is not just anything." "I just wanted to know if the stories were true," I admitted, my voice shaking. "Tomas, I heard something. A whisper. I swear it was calling me." Then, for the first time, he told me the full story of his sister. Her name was Belen. She was 18, One night, she went for a walk along the shore near our house and never came back. Several neighbors claimed they saw her walking into the water as if she was under a spell. Some swore they heard laughter or voices, and then she disappeared into the darkness. I listened in silence, a lump forming in my throat. It was hard not to connect his story with what I had just experienced on the dock, and yet I had no proof. When I checked the recorder later, it had only captured a faint murmur, followed by my own labored breathing. No one who heard that audio would say it was a human voice. Still searching for answers, I suggested we return to Santiago Atitlan to speak with an elder. People in the town considered him a kind of wise man or local shaman. He lived on the outskirts, in a small adobe house surrounded by fruit trees. Don Gregorio, as they called him, greeted us warmly and offered us seats in his patio. The first thing I noticed was his deep, calm gaze, like someone who carried the weight of many centuries of stories. I explained why I was there, what I had experienced, and the whispers I had heard. Don Gregorio sighed deeply, lit a stick of incense, and began speaking in slow Spanish, mixed with the dialect of the region. "They call it the Guardian," he said. "The elders say that, long ago, people made offerings to the lake. Back then, it was sacred. But with the loss of old customs, the spirit grew restless. When someone arrives with a broken heart, with malice, or with reckless curiosity, the call comes, and sometimes it takes them away." "Couldn't it just be dangerous currents?" I asked, trying to find a rational explanation. "Currents exist," he admitted, "but I have seen things that logic cannot explain. Years ago, I helped search for a young man. His friends said they saw him walk into the water as if in a trance. He never surfaced, not even his body. It was as if the lake had swallowed him completely." The old man then fixed his eyes on me with overwhelming seriousness. "If the lake has called you, girl, be careful. This place is a mirror of the soul. It reflects your fears, your guilt, and your desires. There are very ancient beings and energies here. If your heart is not strong, they could take advantage of your weakness." That afternoon, I returned to my accommodation with my head spinning. I couldn't stop thinking about the whisper I had heard. Inside me, I felt a mixture of fascination and fear. I imagined that something at the bottom of the lake had recognized me, and that scared me in a way I had never experienced before. I didn't dare admit it, but part of me wanted to hear it again, to understand it, to capture it in a photograph or a recording that would serve as undeniable evidence. Maybe it was my journalistic drive or my passion for uncovering mysteries, but at that moment, it was hard to tell professional curiosity from real risk. Tomas noticed I was quieter than usual. He tried to suggest that I focus on a different angle for my photography project, perhaps capturing natural beauty, local cuisine, or traditional crafts. He was sincere when he told me he didn't want to see me lose myself chasing danger. But I remained silent, determined to continue my investigation. On the second to last day of my stay, I decided to spend the night on a secluded part of the shore near Santiago, a spot where locals claim to have seen lights emerging from the lake. I managed to convince Tomas to accompany me since I didn't dare go alone. He agreed, but only on the condition that we'd leave right after sunset. Armed with food, flashlights, and my photographic equipment, we set out. The location was a small clearing on the shore, surrounded by trees and rocks. Above us, the stars shone brightly, and the lake stretched out majestic and silent before us. We kept a small fire burning and chatted about lighthearted topics, trying to relax. Around 11 p.m., Tomas suddenly tensed and motioned for silence. We heard it, a faint murmur coming from the water. I grabbed my camera, but the darkness made it difficult to capture anything clearly. My hands trembled as I adjusted the settings. Tomas, his face rigid, pointed toward a spot where the water seemed to shimmer. Indeed, there was a faint glow on the surface, pale, diffuse, almost otherworldly. I held my breath and tried to focus the camera. I adjusted the aperture and shutter speed, but the lens captured only blackness with a distant flash. Then the light moved, as if someone were carrying it at chest height, floating across the water. Tomas grabbed my arm, trembling. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized the light was moving toward the shore, toward us. I wanted to retreat, but my legs wouldn't obey. A whisper drifted through the air, wrapping itself around us like a breeze. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt its meaning. Come here." It was silent yet hypnotic, an irresistible invitation. Tomas reacted first, shaking my shoulder to break my trance. "We have to go, Inez. Don't get closer." But for some reason I couldn't explain, I wanted to stay. I wanted to take a step closer to whatever was moving in the lake. My curiosity pulled me forward, while a primal instinct screamed for me to turn back. In the middle of this inner conflict, I noticed the light beginning to dim, as though sinking beneath the surface. Then, for a brief second, something emerged from the water. I couldn't tell if it was a hand, a humanoid figure, or simply a wave. But that movement jolted me awake. Suddenly, fear surged through me. Tomas practically dragged me back toward the clearing, away from the shore. The light vanished and the whispering faded into silence. Only our rapid breathing remained, cutting through the quiet night. We ran along the path back to town, flashlights trembling in our hands. I didn't dare look back. By dawn, my nerves were still raw. I knew I couldn't stay near the lake any longer, not without risking my sanity. I asked Tomas to take me back to Don Gregorio before I left. I needed to tell him what I had seen. The old man greeted us with his usual calm. When I recounted the events of the previous night, he listened without surprise, as if nothing could truly shock him anymore. "The lake spoke to you," he said, almost solemnly, "and you chose to leave, which is wise. Many aren't so fortunate." I asked him if it had been the Guardian. With an enigmatic tone, he replied, "The Guardian is only a man. In reality, there are other things that inhabit these waters. Some say that if your heart is restless or tormented, the lake will project your anxieties and fears, calling you with your own voice. Sometimes that projection takes on a visible form, tempting you to enter. And if you give in, you become part of the lake." A chill washed over me. For a long time, I had carried the guilt of leaving my family behind to pursue my professional dreams. Perhaps in some way the lake had sensed my regret and exploited it. Then, should I fear myself? I asked softly. Don Gregorio smiled faintly and nodded. "If you have fulfilled what you came for, the lake will let you go. Don't doubt it, but never forget to show this place respect." That same afternoon, I packed my bags and said goodbye to Tomas, thanking him for everything. I took a boat back to Panajachel, then continued on to Guatemala City. I had plenty of photographs for my project, images of great beauty and powerful cultural testimonies. Yet I didn't feel the triumph I had imagined. Instead, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Part of me still wanted to understand what lay beneath those waters, but I knew that if I had insisted, I could have suffered the same fate as others before me. In the following weeks, I reviewed my recordings. The audio file contained only a faint murmur, barely perceptible, along with my gasps and heartbeat echoing in the microphone. I played it for some friends, but they heard nothing unusual. To them, it was just ambient noise, the wind against the microphone, nothing more. I wondered if my mind had shaped those sounds into something else, something sinister. Despite my doubts, my photographs were successful. A gallery in Madrid offered to exhibit them, and the reviews were positive. But whenever someone asked me what the lake was like, I only smiled and gave a polite answer. I never mentioned the whispers or that haunting night by the shore. It's been some time since that trip, yet I still remember that final night. The whisper that nearly drew me into the water, the strange light floating on the surface, and the hand, or whatever it was, that emerged from the depths. Sometimes in my nightmares, I see myself standing on the shore, stepping forward in a trance, and in those dreams, Tomas isn't there to save me. I've since learned more about the Mayan worldview and their beliefs about lakes and volcanoes. I better understand why these places are seen as living entities, forces that can heal or harm depending on your bond with them. Lake Atitlan remains one of the most beautiful places I've ever visited, but also one of the most unsettling. When someone asks me for advice about visiting Atitlan, the first thing I tell them is this: respect the lake, respect its silence and its depth. I'll never tell the full story. Too many people would dismiss it as nonsense, but deep down I wonder, how many others have heard that whisper, and how many never returned?